Welcome to the Answers Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. Hello and welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your wonderful comments. And it is, we're practically in the new year now. And hopefully you're living your dreams and chasing after those things that you want to achieve. If you love the show, please share it with a friend. We've had so many great guests on in the last 12 months with the show that have brought inspirational stories about their life, but also a number of tools that will help you take those next steps. I realize that we're in a post-pandemic world. It's still fresh. The wounds are still healing. And I wanted to bring guests that also brought great stories, but value to you. And I think we achieved that in the last year. So looking at 2023, we're going to do a lot more of that. And hopefully that will get you on the right path. And sometimes I love having guests back because we've already heard their story. We could really dig into what they're doing and bring more of that value. And today I've got Chris Feltons on the line today. Chris, thanks for being here.
Jim, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Got a book out, Think and Grow You. Love it.
Yeah. Actually, launching March 25th, but
okay.
It's done, just in launch plan mode now. So,
I pushed out a book last year, my first one, and looking back at it, and I know we've got some time before your book comes out. I look back and go, man, I could have did this. I could have did that. And now I know why people write multiple books, because they keep striving to get it right or get it better, or there's more to tell.
Yeah. I had to kind of limit it. And I was fortunate to have a multiple, 7-figure sales, book coach. He sold multiple millions of dollars, and we kind of took it slow, and I've been writing over the last year just to make sure it is right. But I know I'm going to have that feeling once it's out. Should have put this in, should have done that, but feel awesome about the product as it sits now, for sure.
Love it. Well, let's talk and bring some of that value I introed the show with. The book is called Think and Grow You. And we can drop a few nuggets so that by the time the book comes out, they're itching to get it. And let's just start with, why did you write the book? Brief overview of yourself in case they didn't catch our interview earlier this year.
Yeah, I've been a financial services entrepreneur for the last, 23 years. And, having been in that world, and we've gone through some crazy things in the last 23 years, I just know, Jim, I know what it's like to be really stuck. And I don't know if you've ever felt stuck before.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Living in fear, doubt, worry. I also know what it feels like, that you feel like you're doing everything possible, but like nothing changes. It's so frustrating. And I've coached a lot of people on it. It massively sucks. And it's painful for me to watch people get so stuck that they just kind of give up, because it feels good in the moment to kind of give up, and then they just settle, and then they just have this nagging voice in the back of their head that they quit. And I was so close to doing that, and I know what that feels like, but I made a serious commitment to just go all in on my personal growth and development, and invested 6 figures plus, and studied thousands of hours of personal growth and development to just learn how to get out of my own way. And so my hope is, people can invest a fraction of the investment, and, spend less time, and hopefully it's a guide for them to get unstuck.
It's amazing how when we get to those places, and I've been there recently, especially being an entrepreneur, working for myself. It's not like you show up every day 9 to 5 and the paycheck's there on the 1st and 15th, and sometimes it can be taxing, and you get to that point. It's like, oh, is today the day I give up? Which is the exact opposite mentality you should have. And I found in my own life, every time I get there, if I can just pull it out, do the thing that gives you that mental shift. If I could just pull it out for the moment, for the hour, for the day, the other side of that looks pretty damn good, and it always has been good. But like you said, how to get out of your own way, that's an important statement. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because I think oftentimes we just get in our own way.
Yeah, I mean, it's, my whole book is basically, how I was stuck, how I was in my own way, and then what I did to really, shift it. So, some examples of that. It's basically, know thyself. And it's good to know how you screw yourself over,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we as humans are addicted to being comfortable, right? And
Yeah.
you mentioned the pandemic. I mean, that was a huge lesson in what addiction to comfort gets you. And one of my favorite quotes is, a life spent seeking comfort results in an entirely uncomfortable existence. And so we, so just some examples of, we hold back, we get in our own way, we don't speak up, we don't say what we're supposed to, what we want to say, we don't feel like we're enough. Or right as we're getting close to busting through that next level, Bob Proctor calls it the terror barrier. We pull back, we bounce off, right, and we go back to comfort because it feels scary. We have a worry pattern. We have and that's what the book's about. Is I identified all these different patterns that were stopping me, and really got an understanding and awareness of like, oh, this is how I stop myself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, once that pattern shows up, what am I going to do about it? And I give the lesson and the keys and the tactics and the strategies that are, hopefully both super helpful for me, but hopefully super helpful for everybody else. So then instead of going down that rabbit hole again, they can interrupt the pattern and choose a different thought and a different action and get a different result. So that's, a key component of the book.
Yeah, I just had Raylan Davis on the line. He's a consulting, entrepreneur coach, and we talked about cold soaks. A lot of people you see them get in ice baths and the intent and purpose behind that. But it's exactly what you said. Is sometimes we have to get a little bit uncomfortable. We get so cozy and comfy where we're at. My mom, she likes to say people sit in their shit because it's warm. But there's a lot of truth to that. We want to live this comfortable mentality, but sometimes we have to get uncomfortable to change, our trajectory and get out of our own way. You've got a line talking about be willing to change, do the work. It's worth it. And I love that because, it's pretty specific.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my overall messaging, through the work is, or through the book is, you have to be willing to change. And unfortunately, people want the outside world to change, and they insist on staying the same. So they spend a big chunk of their lives, like I did, manipulating the outside circumstances, just solving problems after problems, just basically, they live life from the outside in. It's a victim approach. People hate that word, but victim means that, my thinking, my results are all outside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was doing that. And then my wife is like, figure it out or I'm out of here. Look, staring at bankruptcy. I'm the common denominator to all my problems. And I had to change. If my world was going to change, I had to change. So, got to be willing to change, and you got to do the work, because the person that's sitting in the chair, especially if, we're talking about 2023 and you got big goals, that person is not the person that's going to get you to where you need to get to.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to do the work. You got to put it in. And one of my favorite quotes of Mel Robbins is, it doesn't work overnight, but it works over time. And the compounding of working on yourself every single day is huge. And then I think the big one is, I think a lot of people, especially in middle class, they have this internal struggle of, is the work going to be worth it? And they battle themselves. And I did a lot of stupid stuff, Jim. I made a lot of mistakes. But one thing I always bought into was that whatever I put in was going to be worth it. And, the world-class entrepreneur is like, well, it's not, is it going to be worth it or not? It's, I'm going to put the work in until I get my desired results. So it's not either or, will it, won't it? It's for them, the operative word is until.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Talking about being worth it, how do we know what we're looking for? What tools have you used to determine, this effort and this energy is going to be worth it? I know what tools I use. I mean, I focus on my values first, and that I work towards those values. But what tools do you use?
Well, and I think for me, it's always, and once again, it's a pillar of the book is getting really clear about what you want. And that is a beat up topic in personal growth and development, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I mean, everybody talks about it, Jim. Everyone's like, hey, you got to know what you want, got to know what you want, got to know what you want. I actually talk about my own journey with that in the book with a pretty couple amusing stories around it. But I would hear somebody that was just smoking me, very successful, having the life I want. And like, first step is you got to know what you want. I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta take notes. I gotta know what I want. I gotta know what I want. Yeah. And then I close the notebook, and then, squirrel, right? And then I'd get distracted. And then finally I had a moment where it was really laid on me hard that it was costing me dearly not to know what I want. So I sat my butt down. I got clear on what I wanted, but most importantly, I identified why I wanted to do it. I developed compelling emotional reasons, and I specifically identified the feeling that I wanted, because everything we do in life, we're hoping to obtain a feeling. So for me, it always starts there. And when my wife and I are kind of like at odds, we don't know what each other wants, and we don't know what we want as a couple. We're not unified in what we want, and it causes a lot of challenges. So anyway, that's my main thing to focus on.
Yeah. And you know what, that last point there about aligning what you want with your spouse, and working through that together, because I think oftentimes people miss that. They go after what they want selfishly, and then they're at the dinner table like, oh yeah, by the way, honey, what do you want out of life? And we're living this together. And I know not everybody listening to this has a spouse or maybe in that situation, but we need to look at the bigger picture as we work towards those goals and achievements. Otherwise, we're going to get to the finish line and not be happy either way.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's my mentor calls it the tyranny of the urgent. Right. We deal our lives with the tyranny of the urgent, and we have these things that we call them the weapons of mass distraction, right? Cell phones, the weapons of mass distraction. And so when you don't know what you want, you jack around with a bunch of stuff that's just in your line of sight, and you live in, I call it hopium.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you started.
Hoping things get better.
I want to go back to something that you touched on briefly, is not being able to control the outside world, right? We have these expectations and we want the outside world to change to what we want. And it's funny. I always think about the airport when I talk about this subject, because what's going to happen at the airport. People are busy. They're running behind. There's going to be a line at security. There's going to be a line at the ticket counter. It's all going to be a hassle. But yet we want to show up late and just expect that I'm going to have a smooth transition through the airport to my gate and onto the plane. That's just not a reality. And, I always think, gosh, why do I have to suffer because that person showed up late to get here? They're running through the line and they're upset, and, they're impressing on me their stress and anxiety, right? And I think a lot of times life is that way, where we want, as you suggested, the world to conform what what our desires are, but really we need to focus on ourselves and how we can, look at the world, how it works, and work within that parameter. So I'm glad that you brought that up if you want to talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's people are like, well, what's the root that creates stuck? And it's resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And resistance is what should not be happening. And that's actually what creates stuck you're not empowered, you're looking outside, you're frustrated, and my example, is like a flat tire. Right? When you get a flat tire, and like, where do we spend our time? We spend a chunk of it going, whose fault was it? Right?
Yeah.
Like, what the pothole, or and the flat tire doesn't really care.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then my coach what changed me, he said, you need to get to acceptance, and acceptance is really powerful. And I'm like, why would I accept a flat tire? Right. And he's like, well, it's, you don't need to love it, but you have to stop hating it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and that transformed my world. And he just said, and then after that, your only two relevant questions are, what do I want? And what's the next thing I need to do?
Right.
Instead of battling reality, well, I got to get the jack under the car and pull out the spare. And I can do that in a pissed off, irritating, attitude or mentality, which is going to make it even more miserable. Or I could just not hate it, not love it, just be in acceptance and, flow like water. Right.
Yeah.
And,
Work the problem.
And ultimately at the end of the day, I want peace. I want peace. And, my reaction to that stuff, is super imperative.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's all in how we approach the problem, work the problem, and get through the other side. So good point. Talking about peace, you have a chapter on forgiveness, and I love that topic as well, because my pastor said, a few weeks ago, I was listening to him. He says, we need to forgive. And he specifically went into the discussion of debt. He goes, don't be afraid to forgive some debt to people. Right. And there's a lot more context to that. And, we're not going to get into, that sermon, but, I thought about that, and there's some people that have debt with me, and I thought, if I forgive them for that debt, it is actually going to free up some mental space for me to go out and create 10 times that, because of the space that it's filling up. Right. And I think that forgiveness is a lot like that. We hold a grudge or resentment or whatever it might be with somebody, and we're utilizing that headspace for the positive. Let's flip that. So I'd love to hear your take on the forgiveness side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the most, at least for me, probably the most influential chapter, of the entire book. And it was, I was 6 figures in debt, Great Recession, just my business was sucking exhaust, and then I hired a coach. And, I'm a former CPA. I'm a financial advisor, right? I'm looking for tactics, strategies, all that stuff. And we do our first coaching appointment, and he's like, hey, I got a homework assignment for you. And I'm like, goody. All right, homework assignment, great. CPA, left brain dork guy, right? Homework assignment, great. He said, you need to forgive your ex-wife. I was like, she's horrible. like she's a horrible person. I mean, haven't you been listening to me? And we kind of get after it. And he said, dude, if you don't forgive her, you will be broke your entire life. And you'll never let your money in. And by the way, if you don't do this exercise, I fire you and keep your money.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, how do I forgive her? And he's like, sit down, pad of paper, write her name at the top. I want you to write down everything you appreciate about her. And Jim, I've never stared at a piece of paper for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Just the resistance, the hatred, the anger. It had a grip on me. I'm like, man, he's right. And so finally I'm like, well, she's a good mom. So I wrote that down. And he said, do it the next day, and do it the next day, the next day, the next day, the next day, the next day. And then, I was able to just do it mentally when I was working out. And then literally within 90 days, my whole view on her changed. This is a long time ago. I mean, my kids were little, they're now 21 and 18, but my whole view of her changed. And then I started, happy birthday, Merry Christmas, those things. And then my kids live in Atlanta, I live in Denver, and seeing her at baseball games and talking to her. And what happened is I did that, Jim, like my neural pathways totally reformed, right? Like you can't even get me to go back, and I can't pull back a fight. I haven't had a negative thought towards her probably for 15 years.
Wow.
And it changed everything. And I won't get into all of it, but the blessings, I mean, a lot of it's in the book, but the blessings that have flowed from that it's unbelievable what's happened, financially, spiritually, my kids, my relationship with my kids, her second husband, who's a phenomenal guy. And I talk about in my book how I got over the fact that my kids were getting, raised by somebody else because I was at a distance, and,
right.
How I got out of resistance on that. Anyway. And so I do a lot of keynote speaking, and I made a commitment years ago that I would always end with the topic of forgiveness. And Jim, it's amazing. I'll come off stage and people will be lined up, and I'm like, yeah, I did pretty good. All they want to talk about is that. They don't get it. They don't understand it. They come up to me and they're like, you're telling me I have to forgive my ex, my this, my that. They're like, anyway, you and I could do a whole episode on that. Like just the stuff that people hang on to. And then like some of the challenges I threw down to people. This guy walked up to me and he said, you're kidding me. I'm like, go do it. He ran out to the parking lot, called his ex-wife, and dude, he came in, tears. He was a slobbery mess. 30 years of resentment and hatred. And his face, it's like he got 10 years back, dude. It's unbelievable. Wow. Yeah. Anyway, I know it's part of my purpose on this planet is to help people get that particular message. I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, it's interesting, and we don't realize how much headspace we use up on these things until you start eliminating it from your life, and you can fill that headspace up with something positive. The opportunities there. So it's a wonderful message, and I hope that more people catch that.
Yeah.
When I was, my own personal story, going back to when I went through my divorce after 19 years. I didn't know what it was going to look like, and nobody ever wants to go through that. But I had a good friend at the time that said, Jim, be the nicest, kindest, gentlest person you could possibly be through the process. You'll never regret it. And you know what? He was right. Became a friend with my ex. Didn't think that would happen. Doesn't sound like it was as ugly as your situation. It was more on my side. But it's something I never regretted was how we went through that process. And to expand on that, I took that concept to my business life. And anytime I ran into a challenge with a business partner, colleague, customer, etc., I always thought if I could be the kindest, nicest, gentlest person, I'll never regret it. And I haven't. And I've had partnerships dissolve, but on the other side of those, overpaying to buy them out, or overly giving, or giving all the space needed, has resulted in some successful ventures, and not having to go through that forgiveness aspect as well, right? Kind of being preemptive on not having to do that by being kind and nice.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like I said, it's a big topic. People think they know it. They don't really know it. And, their ego, your ego is your enemy on that stuff. Right. And another chapter in my book is your need to be right will cost you your life. Right. And that was a big lesson my coach taught me, because I was such a self-righteous a-hole.
Yeah.
And I just needed to hold on and be right.
Well, that we can all stand a little lesson of humbleness right there. Hey, there's a couple more topics I want to talk about in your book before we run out of time here. Um, One was about people getting clear on their dreams and what they want. We're into a new year now. A lot of times people use the new year for their resolutions and their goals and all those other things. How can we get clear on what those dreams are and what we want?
Yeah, I mean, I think step one is, scheduling sufficient time to sit down, get out of your house, don't go to your office, go to some place that's, pleasing, nice hotel, park, whatever it is. And for me, it's, I got my big green journal here
I love it.
that, this week I'm going to be diving into it. But I think there's a lot of power in writing versus typing. And there's all
Mm-hmm.
sorts of research on how much writing, what needs to fire to make that stuff work. But sitting with it and battling a little bit of the resistance of and doing the work, Jim, that's the hardest work on the planet, which is thinking. Thinking's the hardest work on the planet, and we will do almost anything to avoid it.
Yeah.
And and so, and a lot of people are like, well, I don't know what I want. And usually that's a stinking cop out, because once you got to step up, right? And you got to go to the next level. And then a lot of people, I don't know what I want. I'm like, well, you focus a lot on what you don't. So why don't you write down what you don't want first? And then the exact opposite is going to be what you really want. But I think the most important part is, the world class knows that goal setting is emotional. Middle class thinks it's a logical process. It's not. It's emotional. And I used to apply my left brain CPA mentality with all my spreadsheets and thought I was getting somewhere. But it wasn't until my wife and I sat down and said, okay, what do we want? Well, we want financial freedom. Okay, so what does that look like? And then we spent an hour, Jim, on why do we care?
Mm-hmm.
Why does it matter? And it wasn't some big fantasy island thing. It was just like, I don't ever want to fight around money again. I want to see my kids when I want to. I want us to create some memories, whatever. But it was all really emotional things. And once we surfaced the emotional reasons behind what we wanted and we got to the why, that was the fuel and the gas of the Ferrari. Because without gas, the Ferrari is useless. And the only way you fuel it up is with, your compelling reasons. So
I,
that's the stuff that's helped me.
I appreciate that you talk about being very specific on those, because oftentimes we're not very specific. And as you know, and I know, the more specific we are, the closer we get to achieving that. We can all say we want to go out and make $1 million, but what does that look like? How are we going to make that? Where does that go? What are we going to do with that? Right? Maybe it's not even $1 million we want. Maybe it's not what we need. So being very specific in, your wants and desires are really important. I love hearing people how they want to reset, and I want to support them in doing that. And if you're listening to the show and you haven't reset or thought about where you're going, do it now. When you're done listening to the show, do it now. Don't prolong. I've been working on what I'm going to do next year, the last 90 days, because I'm a big proponent of what I'm doing now is I'll see the results in 90 days. So, I want to hit off the new year already full stride, which I know I will be. So, great advice there. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and then we're going to leave the rest of the book for the listeners to pick it up when it comes out, is a project versus a problem. And I really appreciate that, because I this resonates with me. But let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. It's just, yeah, my coach, passed away February last year, and he, I talk a lot about him in the book, but it was all reframing, my paradigms on things and getting to look at things differently. And I had, $250,000 of credit card debt.
Mm-hmm.
I had major money problems.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, Jim, what you focus on expands. And the more I looked at my debt, the more I hated my debt, the more my debt grew. And he said, you don't have a money problem, Chris Felton. You have a money project,
Mm,
right? And we just look at projects differently than we do problems. When we're on a project and we face some challenges, or we bump up against an issue, like we're going to power through it, we're going to figure it out, we're going to get creative, we're going to pull on resources, we're going to take action, we're not going to curl up, right? And we're going to see it all the way through to completion. And so when he said you don't have a money problem, you have a money project, that reframed in my mind. And it actually, because problem, you're like, oh my God, only God can help me now. Like, what am I going to do? Right?
yeah.
Problems. Project, you like rub your hands together. Like, all right, man, I got a project. Like, let's get on this thing. And you just bring a different level of energy to the party. And as you know, Jim, it's not time management, it's energy management, right? And when you have all these energy leaks, which that's what my book's all about, is all these leaks of energy, of not forgiving and focusing on problems and being in resistance. I got more energy at 51 than I do at 31, because I just look at things differently from all these things. But yeah, it's just I tell people all the time, you don't have a sales problem, you have a sales project. You don't have a health problem, you have a health project. And I don't know. It's just a subtle shift, but man, it seems to help people, really get out of their own way, view it differently, and just bring a whole new level of energy and excitement to change in their lives.
Well, what I appreciate about that is because not often do you take a problem and analyze it and build build a schematic around solving the problem. But when you look at a project, it's like, okay, well, let's build a spreadsheet around this thing. How are we going to fix this project or change this project? Or, you talk about debt. How are we going to chunk through this debt? By the way, if you're in debt and you're suffering from that, I love considering it a project. You would be amazed, especially, and I've worked with some clients in the last couple of years, especially in a post-COVID world, pandemic world, creditors are so willing to work with you to solve your, I'm going to call it a project, that don't allow that to consume your life with stress. Write the project down, call your creditors, work out some solutions. You would be amazed at how willing they are to work with you because they're suffering just like the rest of the country or the world. So, it's not worth bringing that stress into your life when you know that there could be a solution for that. And trust me, start sending checks to these people. They're going to be more than happy. They're going to get off your back and give you some wiggle room. And then you can use that wiggle room to be enthusiastic about completing the project, getting through it, making more money, and coming out on the other side of that. So there is life after debt. Chris is here. He's told us a little bit about it. He's, by the way, you have a what I call the mechanic syndrome. You were an accountant, CPA, but you had financial problems. Most mechanics, their cars suck and they're always broken down.
Yeah.
We want to fix everybody else but ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The cobbler's kid has no shoes.
Yeah. I appreciate your transparency. I'm sure that we can expect that from the book, your honesty about your stories. The book, again, is Think and Grow You, coming out in March by Chris Felton. We'll put a link in the bio here for the show. And Chris, when that book does come out, can you push it our way? Just your marketing, and we'll push it out through our stuff so we get some airtime for that. Because I know our listeners are going to want to hear a little bit more about this.
Yeah, we'll have pre-sales ready to rock and roll on February 1st. So pre-sales with some pretty significant bonuses and giveaways.
Okay.
And then March 25th is the launch date, and the launch event. If you got anybody in Colorado area, I'll be doing that launch event in the Denver Tech Center area in Colorado. But would love everybody's support.
Right on. Well, we got quite a few listeners in Colorado. At least that's what the statistics show on my Spreaker app here. So hopefully we can get a few people out there for you. In the meantime, if they want to find you, do you have a website or somewhere they can go?
Yeah. So a couple websites. ChrisFelton.me is the main website. The book website is thinkgrowyou.com. And I'm very active on Instagram at CF_E2 number 2E. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, all those wonderful places. And I'm dropping things every week around this topic of getting unstuck.
You got it all covered. Chris, thank you so much for your time, and glad to have you back. And we look forward to the book hitting the market, the pre-sales and all that good stuff. So thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to today's show. It is my pleasure and honor to interview all of the guests that have been on the Answer is Yes podcast. If you have enjoyed the show, please go on iTunes and subscribe, give a rating, or simply tell a friend about the show. We also believe in the message of our guests and the positive influence of their stories. As my own mentor and coach, David Meltzer, has taught me, spend some time every day thinking and writing about the things in your own life that you have more than enough of. You will find out how blessed we really are. Please visit my website, livelifedriven.com, for the latest updates about me and what I'm doing. Plus, I post a monthly blog about the many topics on this show. This podcast can also be found there. As I learned early on in life, what you believe is what you will achieve. Thanks, Mark Victor Hansen, and thank you, and have a great week.